Hello, thank you for joining us. I am Holly Schanbauer. I am the founder and executive director of This Is Me. And this is our training for volunteer photographers. And with me, I have Tekla Johnson. And we will just be kind of going through these trainings. Feel free to pause these trainings if you need to and come back to them. But we're going to make this as concise and easy to understand as possible.
Great. I'm Tekla Johnson, and I'm a licensed independent clinical social worker and a board member of This Is Me. And I'll be sharing some just information about trauma, the impacts that it can have on people who've experienced it. And then Holly will be jumping in with some specific stories and talking about things that you might see or that she's experienced related to this when doing photo shoots with folks.
I
Sound good?
guess I should say too that my husband and I have been a foster parent for the past 6 years, and we have three biological children of our own. And the idea of This Is Me came out of having different kids come through our homes and seeing what these kids need and not having a way to give them these resources. Um, as you'll hear throughout some of these trainings, being a foster parent is tough, but it's also very, very rewarding. I often say it's one of the best things we've ever done. Um, but so my experience as a foster parent, and then I also have experience in the nonprofit world and as a teacher, is kind of what brought about the idea of This Is Me.
Great. Yeah. And I met Holly in talking about foster care, and I have been around a lot of families who have been around foster care in that much of the professional work that I've done, well, all of it pretty much has been with families with children under 5. And some of that has been with families who are struggling to heal and recover from substance use and how that impacts children, where children would end up sometimes in foster care for a while, sometimes back with their family. And I was in programs where we would work with the families, whoever was caring for that child, sort of birth to 3 as they went through those different changes in their lives. So kind of like some of the children that might be being seen through photography or things like with adoptions. Definitely not senior photos. I'm not actually an expert in adolescence, so Holly can jump in more there, but I do know a lot about those early years.
I think Tekla, that's why this works so well. You do the younger kids. We take in tweens mainly, and teaching middle school and high school. I don't have a lot of experience with the younger kiddos, so this works out really well. I will say that, the mission of This Is Me is to provide youth in foster care an identity to promote self-confidence, dignity, and a positive self-worth. And when I sat down with Tekla originally, we had sat down to talk about doing foster care and what that means. And I just mentioned to her that I'm starting this organization. And Tekla shared with me that she sometimes works with adults coming out of treatment and addiction. And whenever I picture youth in foster care, I always picture kids in a school setting, in a hallway, walking around, and they have these bubble letters over their heads. And these bubble letters say things like athlete, musician, um, artist. And over a foster child's head, those letters say foster child. And that is their identity. And Tekla's response was, you're so right. Whenever I ask someone that's coming out of addiction to tell me about themselves, they say, well, I was in foster care. They never say, I was a scientist, I was an athlete, I was an artist. And we need to change those bubble letters so that they are something other than foster kids. And that's really where this idea of This Is Me came from. And so this partnership with Tekla and I works really well, being she knows more about these younger kiddos, and I've had younger kids, but we typically do have the tweens.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's definitely true that even as people grow up and move out of the foster care system, if they were in it, right, then that's still a primary identity, and that this is an opportunity to shift that or to widen that for people. So that can just be one of many identities. Great. All right. Should we get started with the information about trauma and all right.
Yeah, so the first half of this training is going to be this trauma informed, um, letting people know about trauma and how to react to the trauma that these kids have been through. Every single child in foster care has been through some form of trauma. And then I will take on the next video and do more of the logistics of being a volunteer with This Is Me.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, so kind of starting out here, we had the idea that it would be helpful to kind of have a shared idea of the definition of trauma and what some of the impacts can be and what trauma-informed care looks like, because we talk about it a lot, at least in social work circles we do. And sometimes I feel like we kind of lose track of what it really means. And so part of this will be also some really concrete ideas which seem sort of basic, but are actually pretty transformational as you work with folks to keep in mind, to keep it a trauma-informed approach, which just means that you're doing something that's going to have the best chance for success with someone who's experienced trauma. And if you can do that, you can actually have the best chance of success with anybody with any experience, because typically people who've experienced trauma are going to be a little bit more sensitive, really listening to what you say, watching for those nonverbals. So if you can be really mindful of that, then things go more smoothly. So there's at the end of this, as part of your packet, also you'll be getting a bibliography. And so I have pulled from some different books that I really appreciate about trauma. And this is one called Unbroken. And I appreciate this idea that trauma doesn't equal brokenness, that the idea that trauma breaks someone is based on shame and bad science, right? What traumatic experiences reveal is though a person can be bent, dented, or bruised, they cannot be broken, right? That we are, in fact, as she says in this book, the unbroken. So just kind of starting with that hopeful and positive view on what trauma is and how people come through it. And that's not to minimize what it is, but just to know that then people respond and have resilience and build resilience and move forward. And sometimes the way we move forward is looks a little funny when you get out of the traumatic experience, right? It cannot make sense anymore, the behaviors that people might bring from that or the meanings that they make in their world. But it is all resilience and survival strategies. So some of the things that can be traumatic include all of these different things on this list. So just kind of keeping in mind, it can be personal experiences that happen within a family system or a home. It can also be things that happen in a larger context or a system. And there is a lot of research that shows that trauma can also be intergenerational. So just keeping in mind that it actually does pass in a body-based way from generation to generation. So kind of like that first slide, trauma is not a flaw or a weakness. It's not necessarily a specific event or just an emotional response. It's something that is actually body and mind based, and it is a response to an event or a series of events. And it's a very effective tool, this response that we have when difficult things happen or when trauma happens, to survive. And it is a spontaneous protective mechanism. And so that can come back up again in other situations, like potentially in a photo shoot or other moments, even after the actual moment has passed. So I'm going to switch here soon to, and I'm not going to go through all these definitions. So I'm going to just switch to a different part of the PowerPoint here while Holly maybe adds anything she's got and just give one definition of trauma that people can kind of work with.
Thinking about our experience as foster parents, we've had about 18 kids come through our home, and they come for various different lengths of time. Some kids we've had for a day or two, other kids we've had for over a year. And all of these kids come with trauma. All of them do. And I think, getting to know these children and how that trauma comes out. Um, One of the things that we notice is we have to be very careful on letting things escalate. I mean, and obviously, hopefully, on a photo shoot that's more than 2 hours long, you won't see some of these behaviors. But these kids have behaviors, and one of the things to know is that these kids are the consequences of their parents' decisions. That it's nothing that they did. They are the victim in all of this, and so to approach that with as much love and compassion and empathy that we can give these kids goes a long way.
Yeah, thanks. Great. So in kind of researching different things for the PowerPoint that I was creating, I came across this document when I was looking for the 6 trauma-informed principles that SAMHSA shares, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration from the US Department of Health and Human Services. And there's so much in here that was great. I thought I'll just share this. So this will also be in your packet and you can have access to it there. But just to be clear, like I'm sharing something that I found because I felt like a lot of what it shared was going to be things that I wanted to just take anyway and share with you. So before we go into the actual definition of trauma, just to keep in mind that, like Holly just said, right, that things to remember are that the underlying question often that we go to is like, what's wrong with you, right? When someone does something that doesn't make sense to us, or that seems like maybe an extreme response, whatever it is. And the suggestion as we think about trauma is to change that question for ourselves, and to, when we are facing something we're not sure quite what's going on, to consider what happened to you, maybe what happened to that person in front of us, right? And understanding that symptoms are adaptations to traumatic events. So they might not make sense in the context in that moment where you are with someone, but they really make sense for that person and what they've experienced. And that healing happens in relationship. And so also there's the opportunity through your couple of hours even with this person to make a difference in their lives and to be part of that healing. So here's the definition that they share. Right, it is like in the other slide I shared, it's an event or series of events that were set of circumstances that's experienced physically or emotionally, right, as life-threatening, and it can have adverse effects that last and pervade after the impact has happened in the moment. So it can impact individuals' functioning, mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. Anything you want to add to that, Holly, as far as how you would think about it or part of a
No, I
definition?
agree. I agree completely. Yep.
Great. So you can kind of think of the 3 E's in trauma. There can be events or circumstances that are impacting or cause trauma. There's then the experience of the person, right? 2 people can be in the same room and one person can have a traumatic experience. The other person may not actually experience that as a trauma. So each person's experience of that is different. And then there are effects, right? The things that happen afterwards and the impact that that has longer term. So this is a more comprehensive list of the different kinds of traumatic events. And again, it's just helpful to kind of look through these, keep them in mind as you work with people. And right, as we go through this, I think it's an intense topic, whether you've experienced trauma yourself or not. The statistics in the United States show that as adults, at least 70% of people, and that's just people reporting, have experienced some kind of trauma in their life. And so it may even be quite a bit higher than that. So also recognizing that this PowerPoint may bring things up for us, which is where Holly was suggesting take a break if you need to. I also say just keep taking breaths and doing what you need to do to take care of yourself and stay present. So like that previous slide that kind of talked about the 3 E's, the experience of trauma can be affected by how, when, where, and how often. So it is a developmental experience. And so kind of ask that question, why does it impact some people more than others? And how do those effects sometimes show up differently? So we can think about it as a normal response to an abnormal situation. And it's also a developmental response when you think about children, because at different ages, children are going to be at different points in their development. And so they're going to have different responses. And because there's so much development happening in those early years, if something is experienced very early on, even years later, there's still a developmental process that's happening as that child or that person is making sense within themselves of what's happened to them. And so you're also meeting them within that moment of their own developmental understanding and trajectory, as having trauma be part of that.
And I think this can even be complicated when you have siblings. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if you're at a photo shoot for an adoption and there's a younger sibling and an older sibling, that older sibling is going to have their trauma is going to look much, much different than maybe the younger sibling's trauma will look. If the younger sibling only knows that family as mom and dad, but the older sibling is going to feel a much greater loss at that adoption. And so things to keep in mind that trauma does affect people differently. Um, and their age matters, but so does their experience and what their experiences, uh, how they viewed those experiences and that trauma that they lived through, when doing some of these photo shoots or just, coping. You're gonna have to keep that in mind when you're out there and interacting with these kiddos, that it's not all the same for every child. Just because they're from the same family doesn't mean their trauma is the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. That's helpful, definitely to keep in mind. And again, these are all things that you'll have in your packet, so you can just kind of go back to them. But in thinking about this, especially if there's different children of different ages, right, you might see different kinds of responses or things that you'd be like, kind of just noticing something that could be on this list or be on this list, of ways that trauma can show up in different ways. And I don't know if this is where you'd want to say anything about like that story about how the person wanted to be photographed, or if that's going to be in the next video.
Yeah. So I have a book that I refer to often. So it is called, this one is called Stella. It is part of The Thrown Away Children by Louise Allen. And she is a foster care provider and writes about her experience with these kids. And I just want to read a very short excerpt from this book. I think this explains really, really clearly and has such imagery of what it's like sometimes for foster care providers and the kids that they have. And in this book, this little girl Stella is 4 years old and just came to live with Luis and her husband, Lloyd, and they are in England, and so everything's English. But um, and they are outside having a wonderful day. And I'm just going to read this really quickly. Um, Much laughter flows from the garden. I notice the boys watching the game while clattering like old men. And I go and get Lloyd's camera from his studio. This is an afternoon that needs a snap for the album. Happy memories are being made. Even Lloyd is drawn out of his studio. The deadline's now less pressing. Good. He is a far better photographer of the pair of us, so I'm pleased. He grabs a handful of crisps and comes out into the garden with me. We both inhale the atmosphere. We love these moments, and it's great to share them. Lloyd snaps away at the happy scenes. He likes to take candid shots. Our children are used to Lloyd recording their lives, and often for foster children whose lives may have received erratic or little recognition and coverage, and where the movement between homes means that photos of times before are easily lost. There is great value in recording them, engaging in fun activities, or just being, especially if their early lives have been chaotic. I call everyone together, channeling my inner director. Today I want the group shot as well as the candid ones. The boys pretend to hate it and drag their feet around, moaning that as they are put into position, but funnily enough, pop up grinning in the back. The girls maneuver little Stella, the star of today's show, into the front of the picture. Zoe slicks down Stella's hair that have gradually escaped from Lily's handiwork with the ponytail. With much excitement, I get them all into place. Lloyd has the camera ready. Say cheese, I call out. Cheese, chorus most of the assembled subjects in unison, but without warning, Stella throws herself onto the floor, pulls off her knickers, points her legs upward in the air, and parts her legs to face the camera. Shocked, Lloyd puts down his camera and looks at me. Though we have never seen anything like this before, we both know what this must mean. And I think, this is very unlikely to happen in these photo shoots. But there's always that chance. With foster kids, you don't know what their background is. You don't know where they're coming from. You don't know what's going to, set these kids off to feel the way that they're feeling. And honestly, most of the time they don't either.
Mhm.
And it's just one of those scenarios that could happen. What do? You take a breath, you get yourself together, you help Stella up, you get her dressed, and you give her a moment and you move on. In this book, Stella asks her, "Why are you sad?" She's 4, she doesn't understand. And I think scenes like this are sadly more typical than we know.
Mhm.
I know that we've had some, not to this degree, but we've had some instances happen in our home that we're like, whoa, I don't know where that came from. and I'm sorry you're hurting. And the kids don't even really realize that they're hurting because they haven't begun to deal with that.
Right. Yeah. They don't even know what else there could be.
Yeah.
It's kind of the normal. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, Dr. Bruce Perry does a lot about brains and has worked a lot. He's amazing with children and with youth who've experienced trauma, like usually very extreme trauma. And he was working with a boy who they couldn't figure out, like this child was having a really hard time. I think it was at school. It could have been a foster parent. I can't remember, but it was a specific person. And there was just this huge reaction and they just couldn't figure out. And he kept working with the child. And they finally figured out it was actually a scent that caregiver or teacher was wearing that had been the same as what that student had experienced. And the student wasn't even aware of it, like could not say it, even though it was an older child. But when they put those things together, then they realized it was the smell that was triggering. And then the child just completely kind of fell apart.
That's a perfect example. It could be as something as simple as you're wearing an orange shirt and the child and the person who harmed this child was wearing an orange shirt. And that connection isn't going to be there for the child to understand, but it's going to do something that makes them uncomfortable and act out.
Yeah. And this leads really well into the next slide here. Let me share the screen again, where it kind of talks about these adaptive responses. Where it's basically just it's our survival instincts, right? That we have these amazing adaptations within ourselves that keep us safe, right? So our body's checking for a smell or a sight or something that connects so that we can avoid whatever happened before. We make those connections subconsciously often. And so you can see that then what happens when we're sort of operating, there's like the oldest part of our brain is way back here, and it was what developed first. It's what actually everything kind of flows through, and it is where we respond with sort of the fight, flight, or freeze response, which is usually what happens when all of our other responses that come from other parts of our brain don't work or don't feel like they're fast enough to keep us safe. So these are the like really base responses to try to survive. And so we kind of have this overlay up here of all these other sort of wiser, calmer, slower parts of our brain. But this part back here is where a lot of that trauma kind of response sits, and then the behaviors come out of that. So these are kinds of things I was thinking that in a photo shoot, potentially you could see. They also seem a little bit related to like teenage development or 2-year-old development, right? Like some of those big changes in life. Sometimes these kinds of things come up too. So there's always a lot of different things at play, but
I
right,
think,
when someone
Becca,
is,
you need to,
yeah,
we also need to understand that some of these older kiddos are emotionally at the younger child's level. And I think, we may have had an 11, 12, 13-year-old in our care. They are never emotionally 11, 12, or 13 because of their trauma.
yeah,
Um, we had an 11-year-old with us for almost a year or for a little over a year. And one of the things that I noticed is she wanted to sit on my lap all the time. And I was a little uncomfortable with this at first. And then I asked her one day, I'm like, why do you want to sit on my lap? And she goes, well, I've seen it on TV and it looks nice. She had
hmm,
never had that where a child sits on the parent's lap and you rock. And so she was actually visiting us a couple weekends ago and she was
hmm,
sitting on my lap and I was rocking her in the recliner. We actually brought a recliner upstairs after she told me that. And she was on my lap and I go, Amy, I love, and she looks at me, she goes, me. And I go, yes, I love you. But I love that she had moved on and has been adopted since. But I said, I love that I no longer have to watch your phone. I no longer have to watch your grades. I can just enjoy you.
yeah,
And just going back to that 2-year-old Amy is what
hmm,
she needed at that time. And so even when kids are 11, 12, 13, 18, a lot of times these kids with trauma are emotionally not going to be 11, 12, 18.
hmm, yeah. It's like not just the question what happened to you, but when, and kind of guessing on when, what different things what needs might not have been met, that kind of show up. Yeah. So again, if a person that you're with or a student or a child is sort of gets startled or gets triggered for whatever different reason, starts to feel scared, right? You might start seeing some of these things that like from the outside look sort of like non-compliant or combative or kind of like, right, struggling to regain that sense of personal power, being uncooperative or disengaged or withdrawing. That's more of like a flight response. And freeze is sort of that passive, unmotivated, giving into those with power. And so I just thought this slide might be helpful to kind of just be thinking if you see some of these things, right? Could be a developmental thing, partly could be a million different things, but just kind of holding in mind, like maybe there's a way to at this moment slow down and give back more of that power, or to help this child kind of move back up into other parts of their brain so they're not just stuck with this flight, or freeze, because it doesn't feel great to be in, and it doesn't probably feel great to be around either. So sometimes these are also just opportunities. They're cues and opportunities that to slow down and to try to match what that child might need in the
That's a
moment.
really good point, Tekla. And it wouldn't hurt if there's some crackers or some candy in your bag and say, hey, I really need to take a break when you see this come up, and offer some candy or some crackers or something to let them freeze for a moment. Let them, take flight for a moment away from what they're doing. Let them focus on something else. And when they're ready to bring them back. I like
Yeah.
what you always say, take a deep breath, stop and take a
Yeah.
breath.
Yep. And that is, so I have just sort of three quick tools here that I thought would be, useful to people kind of no matter what. And I think that just to try to keep it really simple, the idea of slowing down and pausing, I think is like really, to me, the best tool and the first tool when working with other people, especially if there might be a trauma response coming up. And so, the idea of just taking a breath yourself. Often, if you do that, you'll notice that the person in front of you will imitate you. Maybe they don't even know they're doing it. That idea of having some water, let's sit down, let's have a snack. Like, I need a break. You don't need to put it on the other person, right? But just trying to figure that out and notice and probably practice as you can. Um, our typical response is to speed up when we get nervous. And so if you keep practicing at different times when you notice yourself in whatever, you know, place in life you are, whatever you're doing, you notice something kind of difficult and your tendency to speed up, just keep practicing slowing down, and then you can bring that into these photo shoots. And there's the science kind of behind this is a hand that I really like. This is from Dan Siegel, who kind of came up again, this sort of base part of the brain that's the fight, flight, or freeze area. And then there's all this overlay, which is all the stuff up here. And so what happens is very quickly we can flip our lid, is I think how he talks about it. And then it actually physiologically takes 20 minutes to fully rewrap with all of this upper part of our brain where we can think, where we can be reasonable, where we're really present and pretty accurate with how we're perceiving things. So just kind of keeping in mind, this can happen an instant to you or the person you're photographing, and then just being patient to kind of do some overlay. And it doesn't mean you have to fully stop for 20 minutes, but just to know that it really takes our bodies a long time to regroup and to reground. And so even just taking one breath as a step towards that, or just taking that pause, like Holly said, can be great. And so as she maybe shares any other ideas, this is kind of the ideas that I had for folks if you want to be practicing before you even are out there doing the work, right? These 1 to 3 breath practices are listed in a book called Search Inside Yourself. That's a lot of fun. That will be in the bibliography as well. You can keep working, if you already don't have one, a daily personal practice of some sort of like 2-minute meditation, 1 breath intentional per day, right? Like just something that you do. And if you can embed, daily practices, if you go to school, to the school day or to a regular day, just kind of having that daily practice, then when the moment comes, you'll be like, oh yeah, and you just grab for that thing because you're more familiar with it. Anything else you want to say about that, Holly?
No, it's great.
And then sort of my idea for a trauma tool number 2 is to think about this trauma-informed mindset, which SAMHSA defines as having these 6 characteristics. So trying to consider the sense of safety, being trustworthy and transparent, peer support may not be as relevant with the work you're doing, but teens could bring a friend, or maybe having a foster parent there or some other support person, kind of those supports that are more even, like a photographer or other authority figures, right, are kind of like separate, not as well known. So that idea of just having known people around to support, the idea of collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice, and choice, and then keeping in mind always the cultural, historical, or gender issues. So if you're working across cultures, genders, life, or experiences of whatever sort, just keeping in mind that the way that you're experiencing the world, the way you're experiencing what you're saying, how it sounds to you, might really land differently for that person because of some of their different lived experiences.
Yeah, I like this. And being cognizant of the safety issue. Um, if you are doing a reunification photo shoot with a mom and a child, and the child has um, been through a lot and is quite spirited, the best place to do a photo shoot is probably not on a sidewalk with by a busy street. I mean, you don't want to take that. So just physical safety things around it as well, making choices of where you're going to shoot, how you're going to do it, and with who.
Yep. Yeah. Are there any other of these points? I had a couple of thoughts too to share about some of these points, but are there any other things really practically, Holly, that stand out for you about ways that people can incorporate this into the photo shoot?
Um, well, I think, all of these shoots that are possible in This Is Me are going to have different requirements. And I think of the senior photos as a very important one. I mean, that shows there who these kids are. And a lot of times at 17, 18 years old, they are in the midst of that self-identity. And so you have the gender and the culture and the, everything else. And to try to embrace that instead of discourage that, if that makes sense. And really um letting the kids, if it's safe, uh uh lead that and just go with it and see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was sort of thinking, like that opportunity. Anytime you can sort of give two options, or if you want to make it open, you could, but sometimes that can be overwhelming as well. But like, would you rather do this photo shoot inside or outside, or whatever different options there are, and really, slowing down at the beginning to introduce yourself and to ask if that child wants to know, or that family, if it's depending on what kind of shoot it is, what do you want to know about me? Or what can I share with you? What questions do you have for me as a photographer? Or, maybe, I don't know, bringing photos that you've taken before. Maybe that's not a great idea. I don't know, but just things or if you have, photos of nature or things that's very soothing, right? Nature, and there's no comparison because we're not a bird or a tree or whatever. So we don't have to say, oh, my family looks like this and that family looks like that, right? That can come into play probably with those kinds of photos. But just sharing things of yourself and taking it slowly, to try to build that sense of safety, obviously physical safety, but also just that connection of like, okay, this person, I can trust them. They're moving slowly enough. They feel like what they say on the outside matches what's on their inside. So if you've had a hard day, or if you're feeling kind of jangled for whatever reason, trying to really work within yourself to notice like, okay, I'm really settled within my own heart and mind right now. I'm ready, rather than just kind of showing up, however, which might work for lots of people, but might be harder.
A really good point, Tekla. And it can be something as simple as, do you want to stand or do you want to sit for this photo? And giving them some of that power
Yeah.
can be really, really helpful. And then if things do, feel stressful, modeling that, taking those deep breaths yourself, and I've always, with our younger kids, whenever they're having a meltdown, I will do the deep breathing. And I will take several deep breaths, and before you know it, they're breathing with me.
Mhm.
So modeling that is really important as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Yeah. And so then the third thing I thought of, and again, these are obviously very basic, but in the moment when something happens that's surprising or moves differently than you expected or quickly, all of these things are harder to access than one would think. So that's why I'm starting with these, because I do think they're really helpful and they don't always come naturally when we get stressed. So there can be surprises in these photo shoots, right? Like a child could be triggered and then they might do something that seems really unexpected to you. Probably makes perfect sense to them, but isn't going to make sense to you in the moment necessarily. And so kind of having a couple of really short phrases in your back pocket, which can include just being quiet and taking a breath, like Holly said. But a couple other things that I've really liked to use when I've been surprised. So I did a lot of home visits in most of my professional life before I moved into leadership things. So being out in people's homes, things happen and maybe the person you're with didn't even expect it. I've been in homes where like somebody comes busting through the front door and runs out the back. Clearly they're being chased by somebody, nobody really expected that, but there we were. And some other kinds of funny things have happened. So I've really practiced these ahead of time, and I found them really useful when I'm just really not sure what to say or do, because I kind of go into freeze, honestly, because I'm so surprised. So I kind of just am ready with, tell me more. Like maybe somebody says something or does something, and to give yourself that moment to regroup, you take a drink of water, you take a breath, or you just say, tell me more about that. And you try to keep it really light and non-judgmental. And maybe maybe you're even misunderstanding what you thought you heard, or maybe there's more to say and it is as surprising or concerning as what you thought, but at least you know more about it. I write that idea of like, let's just take a moment. I need a break. Let's sit down, whatever that is. And then that idea of like, there's no rush. Let's just pause, or whatever you can come up with that feels comfortable to you. But again, practicing it in less stressful moments brings it to the forefront when you actually need it. If you actually encounter a surprise, which you totally may not. But if you are, it's nice to feel a little bit prepared.
This was the slide that made me think of Stella. And that, I mean, obviously that was a surprise, her reaction to say cheese. And hopefully, our photographers won't come into anything like that. But as a foster parent, we don't always know the story. We don't know why these kids were taken from their homes. We don't know what kind of trauma is in their background typically. And even if we do get told something, it's never the whole story. And so if something like that were to happen, it's really, really, really important as soon as that photo shoot is over to have a phone call with This Is Me and let us know what happened so that we can share that with the social worker in case nobody had ever heard that Stella, had gone through that. And so having that open communication with us too. Someone from This Is Me may or may not be at these shoots, and we'll talk about that later. But it's important that that communication is open, and if something like that does come up, that is shared back with us so that we can let the social workers know to hopefully at some point we'll never know the full story that these kids have gone through, but it will help piece some of the puzzle together.
Yeah. And I don't know, if during a photo shoot, Holly, if you're always available, or someone from This Is Me, like whether someone's physically there or not. But another strategy that I've used is just to say like, hold on a second, I'm not quite sure what to do, but I want this to go well. Let me check in with Holly. Let's take a moment, right? So that you can actually pull in someone else's brain and someone else's ideas to try to piece through what might happen next. And again, none of this is what's expected, but the point of this training is to kind of have you be thinking about the unexpected so that if and when you do encounter it, you feel like, okay, I had a little preparation for that, and you feel more ready for it.
And we'll talk about this later as well, the kind of the logistics behind the photo shoots, but there will be a conversation prior to and after the shoot. We will know when the shoots are all happening so that we can be available by phone if we are not present at the shoot. So you would always have that support.
Yeah, great.
Mhm.
Yeah, so those were the sort of three sort of basic, but also sort of challenging tools that I wanted to share. And like I said, the different things that I've referenced, a lot of the books and videos that I've watched to think about trauma and how I want to work with folks who've experienced trauma are all going to be in the bibliography and will be shared with you by Holly. And so if you want to learn more, you can. And this was really just intended as a sort of brief and quick overview if this is a topic that's new for you.
Yeah, and I think just keeping in mind that every single child that you have a photo shoot for, or family that you have a photo shoot for through This Is Me, will have encountered trauma. And I think Tekla, I heard from you at one point that something like 70, 80% of people in the US have had trauma at some point in their lives, and it's probably even higher. Um, and so just to keep that in mind, we want to make sure that we are doing more good than harm for these kids. And though these photo shoots are so important and we need to give these kids an identity, we need to give them something to really uh help them see that they're more than just that foster kid. Um, we also don't want to do more harm than good. And so it's important that you are trained on trauma to some extent, being able to identify, giving some tips on how to proceed with that. And so this is the first of two trainings. The next one will be a little bit more logistical on how to work with This Is Me. But I think it was great. Tekla, thank you so much. Your insight is so valuable. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you.